Okay, awesome. Thanks to everybody for coming to the March Gainesville PowerShell user group meeting. This is our first virtual meeting. So there will be a recording available afterwards, and special thanks to Josh King for being our first presenter. And he'll be speaking about Azure Sentinel for PowerShell scripters. So Josh, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yeah, sure, thanks. You need you to stop the share first.
Done.
It won't let
There
me
you
take
go.
over. Yeah, awesome.
Perfect.
If we go with that one. All right, let me know when you can see that.
All good on my end.
Awesome. Yeah, so today I'm going to have a look at how PowerShell scripters can make use of Azure Sentinel. We are going to have a quick look at the out-of-the-box, what Azure Sentinel is, how to set it up, some of the out-of-box connectors and how to get data in there. But that's not really the point of the talk. We're sort of going to see how we can twist it to become a logging endpoint for PowerShell scripts. So I'm Josh King. You might be able to tell from my accent that I'm not from the States. I'm actually from the other side of the world, down in New Zealand. I'm a systems or sysadmin at a MSP called Tribe, and also a Microsoft MVP. You can find me on Twitter at WindowsNZ, or my blog is toastit.dev. So a good place to start is, what is Azure Sentinel? And the short answer there is it's Microsoft's new cloud-based SIEM, and that's security information and event management. And then they apply a bit of AI and machine learning over the top of it, and it integrates easily with a bunch of Azure services and, as we'll eventually see, pretty much everything or anything out there. So there's 4 pillars to it, and we'll go through each of them really quickly, and I'm just going to read off Microsoft's own marketing around them, because they actually do a really good job summarizing them. So the first pillar is collect data at a cloud scale. This means you can collect data about all users, all devices, all applications, and all infrastructure, and that's both on-prem, in Azure, or other cloud providers. Then the next step is detect, which is getting visibility on previously unseen or uncovered threats. With some of the smarts there, you can minimize false positives and leverage all of the threat intelligence that Microsoft is generating through their huge security team. Then once you've detected, you can investigate. And that's using AI and hunting tools, and again, leveraging the cybersecurity work that Microsoft's already doing. Then the final piece is respond, and this is where it gets really cool, especially for PowerShell people. So basically, you can quickly respond to any incidents, and you do that using built-in orchestration and automation tasks, tools. No, I thought I had another thing pop up there. So that starts, so it's a SIEM, but then it also gets into that new SOAR space, which is security orchestration, automation, response. So it can effectively be the ground bed for a full-on security operations center. Now, a very reasonable question is, what does this cost? Because of course, when I first started looking at this, it was in preview and therefore free. And then when it came out of preview, there was some costs involved. So Azure Sentinel itself costs basically $2.50 US per gigabyte ingested. Now, it's important to know that that's just the cost for Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is a layer that's applied on top of log analytics. And there is actually a cost for log analytics as well, which is $276 per gigabytes, although you do get the first 5 gigs free per month. Now, out of the box, logs going into this will be retained for 90 days, which I believe that's an increase that you get for using Sentinel, because log analytics by default is 30 days. So Sentinel increases that to 90. Then if you need it for longer, you can pay 12 cents per gig per month over and above the 90 days. So what started me down this path is basically there's a concept in New Zealand called the number 8 wire mentality, or otherwise known as Kiwi ingenuity. The number 8 wire thing is basically the common fencing wire that you'll find on farms. And given a lot of farms in New Zealand are really remote, farmers would find themselves with a lot of it and apply it to tasks that probably wouldn't be associated with that wire, like fixing their tractors. And it sort of developed into this thing where as long as you've got some number 8 wire, you can fix literally anything, sort of like duct tape. So I looked at Sentinel and went, yeah, this is cool, but I'm not really a security person. But I wonder if I can bend it to my will in a PowerShell sense. And that's what we're going to explore today. So we'll head straight into demos. If you happen to catch a previous version of this talk, I don't remember which user group it was for, you'll know that my internet didn't play ball for me, and the demo sort of flopped. So I have recorded all of these. What that does mean though is I can pause mid-demo, so if you've got any questions, I guess pipe up and ask, or pop them in chat, and I assume Andrew can interrupt me on your behalf. But yeah, so don't hesitate to ask questions as we're going, or save them up for the end. The first thing we're going to look at is setting up a brand new Sentinel workspace and have a quick look through some of the out-of-the-box connections and alerts. So we start in the, if I can get this started. So we start in the Azure portal. If I can actually press the play button. Huh, it doesn't want to play while I'm presenting. All right, we'll do this a different way. Andrew, can you just let me know that you can actually see the video?
Looks great, man. You know, if it works
Awesome.
the first time, it wouldn't be right, you know?
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we start in the Azure portal, head up to the top and search for Azure Sentinel. We can see I'm starting from a blank slate, so I click Add to create a new one. Now, you remember what I said, that Sentinel is a layer put on top of log analytics. So when we click this new workspace button, what we're doing is actually creating a new log analytics workspace first. If we had one of those already and we want to add Sentinel, we could do that. It would appear in that list and we just choose it from the list. So creating the workspace, you choose your subscription and your resource group. I created a new one for this demo and named it appropriately, so I know where the heck it came from later when I'm cleaning up my tenant. Then I have to give it a name, and again, gave it a name that sort of made sense for what I'm doing. If I was doing this for real, I'd probably put the words PowerShell in there. Now you'll notice the list of regions available isn't as long as what's there for other resources. Luckily, the one that's closest to me, being Australia Southeast, is in that list, so I've chosen that. Then you pick your pricing tier. There was only one there available for me. You can get capacity reservations. which give you a discount, but you've got to be putting through a hell of a lot of data in order for those to make financial sense, which is why I didn't even include them in the pricing slide. And I believe you have to go off and request those tiers as well, which is why I don't see them in the list. Then next is your Azure tags. I'm not using them like I should be, but if you were, you can specify them here and then go and create. So creating the workspace does take a little bit of time. I ended up pausing the recording here and all of a sudden it's there. So that's what it looks like if you had a workspace that doesn't have Sentinel attached to it. It's just in that list and you select the one you want. Then click Add Azure Sentinel. It thinks for a little bit. This bit is actually fairly quick, so I don't think I had to pause the recording for that. But then you get to this getting started page where it takes you through, hey, you want to collect data, then you want to set up alerts, and then you can go and do the cool automation stuff once you've gone through that. So the collecting data is through these data connectors, and there's a really long list. So out of the box, there's AWS, there's a bunch of Azure stuff in there. There are security appliances like your Fortinets and your Cisco ASAs. But then there's also generic ones like Common Event Format. And further down, there's also a syslog one. So if you've got a syslog server, you can just point it to forward at Azure Sentinel. When you click that open connector page, it does actually walk you through how to set that up, and it works quite well. But for this, I wanted to have a quick look at the prereqs on things. So this is Azure Active Directory. I want to add this, but unfortunately, when it goes and checks all the prereqs, I find out that I don't have the licenses needed for it, being the Azure Active Directory P1 or P2. So unfortunately, I can't connect that one. One that I can connect is Azure Activity. So I go through and open the connection page. It's got one prereq, and that's that the workspace has read and write permissions. Now, this is connected at a subscription level. So if I had multiple subscriptions, they'd all be listed there and would show whether or not they were connected to Log Analytics. This one obviously isn't. So I click into it and then click Connect. And it's automatically changed to connected. So now any Azure activity is going to start getting logged in Azure Sentinel. So if I head back into there, and now I want to look at the alerts, which are under Analytics. The only one that's there out of the box, when it finishes loading, is the Advanced Multi-Stage Attack Detection. That's the fancy machine learning, AI-based fusion thing, where it's basically looking at everything and trying to correlate data and figure out the really advanced stuff that you just wouldn't be able to write a query for yourself. And I believe I go and highlight like the words machine learning and all that, which is fun. But out of the box, there are a bunch of templates, and you can see that up the top there. And what I like to do is sort that by data source. And that's because I know what data sources I have enabled. It makes it easy to find the out-of-the-box templates that are available to me at the moment. So if I scroll down to Azure Activity, I can see there's a few there. And you'll notice this one here that's in preview actually has a second data source that's needed as well. And unfortunately, I didn't click into it to find out what that second data source actually was. But if I find one that I like, so this one is creating an alert if there's a suspicious number of resources being created or deployment activities happening. So I can find a template. If I like it, I'll click the Create Rule button down the bottom. And then all of this info is out of the box. So there's a name, description. Tactics are, they have actual real world meanings in the security world. I flub this a bit when we get into the PowerShell side of things, but the templates have the right one for what it's testing, what it's alerting on. The actual alerts themselves are based on a query, and it's in a query language called Custo or KQL, which if you're used to SQL will look very familiar. The only thing is this is for getting data. You can't actually affect the data through it, so you can't make changes to the logs. You can transform things in that within your alerts, but that isn't reflected back in your logs. And we'll see the logs soon once we start sending our own data up there. So, of course, in the templates, those queries are already written. Now, there's these map entities here, which there's key pieces of information that Sentinel can use when you're doing threat hunting. So it's things like what account it was, the IP address, the host name, all of that. What you want to do is if you have a column in your data that matches that, you want to associate them effectively so Sentinel can do its thing. And out of the box with this template, both account and IP address have been mapped, and you'll notice that it says defined in query. So if I go back up to the query and roll down, when we get there, it's those extend ones, and it's a bit hard to see. But we'll see that a bit clearer later when we're not dealing with a huge alert. The key thing there though is just select them and then click add, and it'll add it to your query for you. Then the next thing to be aware of is these out of the box alerts. They run the query once a day. So it's very much a get your logs going in, and then once a day, if something was weird that day, it'll trigger an alert. If you want it more real time, you can pull that all the way down to running the query once every 5 minutes, for example. For this, I've just left it at 1 day. And then you can specify the threshold. So out of the box, this will, if the, excuse me, if the query returns an event, any event, because this is set to is greater than 0 on the threshold, it'll fire off a alert. If you're like, no, I expect 2 to 3 of these to happen in a given period, you can set that as your threshold, and then anything above that will trigger. And you'll notice in the graph, it's really hard to see because it's on 0. There is a red line there. That red line shows up wherever your threshold is set. And then when you've got actual data, you'll see a line representing how many of those alerts or events will have been triggered. So you can get an idea of where your thresholds are and that from the preview. And I believe we're just going to walk through that quickly. I believe 5 minutes is the minimum run every setting you can have. Now, in Sentinel, there's a difference between an alert and an incident. Out of the box, your alert's going to create incidents. And that's where this is enabled up top by default. There's a new option here called alert grouping, which will add new alerts to an existing instant. I haven't actually played with that yet, and I've just left it as the default, which is disabled. But there's some cool options in there, like reopening matching instance if you get more alerts. It's just to reduce some of the noise. Now, automated responses is where you start doing your SOAR stuff. We're going to create a playbook later of our own, which will hopefully be useful. But once you've created one, it then shows up in this list, and you can just select it and associate it with your alert. So then you get a summary screen, click create, and it goes off and does the thing. So I didn't demo this particular alert firing because I don't know how many resources I would have had to spin up in my tenant, and I didn't really want to incur that cost. So that is the out of the box stuff. Now we'll have a look at sending our own data up to Sentinel. Now, how we're going to be doing this is actually through the Log Analytics workspace itself. So we head to there in Azure and choose it from the list. Now, the reason why we're doing it via this path is because Log Analytics is where the logs live, and there happens to already be existing modules and API work that's been done to allow us to talk directly to these workspaces. But we need two pieces of information for that. The first is the workspace ID, which an add-on I have running blurs out the workspace ID. But if we head down to Azure Advanced Settings, we can see the workspace ID there and my primary key for connecting. And I have regenerated both of these keys since the recording. So I'm not too worried about showing them. So I'll head over to PowerShell 7 and save both of those workspace ID and my key into variables. Later on, and I don't show adding them, but later on I use Microsoft's new secrets management tool to store those, to retrieve them when I need them. Now, the first thing we need to decide when sending logs through to Sentinel is what the log is called. This can literally be anything, but you sort of want to have one use case being a specific name, and you don't want to cross-pollinate things. And we'll see where the log name shows up in the dashboard soon. Then we need some data to send, and for this demo, I'm just grabbing the output from get service. So one thing to be aware of with logging and alerts is just the data by itself isn't all that useful. Ideally, what you also need is a timestamp for each of those alerts, so you can actually figure out what the time series is and when things happened and all of that. So what I'll do is on that data, I'm going to add a new member, and it's a note property member, which is what all the other bits of information on that are. And I'm just going to call this new property timestamp, and the value of that is going to be what the time is now. So I use get date, and I output that in the O format, which is a ISO, whatever the universal time format is. I forget which ISO number it is now. I used to talk about it all the time, because of course different countries write it different ways, and that one's universal. So now that data needs to actually be in a JSON format so that Log Analytics can ingest it. And then finally, when I start typing again, I'll use the sendoms API ingestion file function. So this is in a module that's available up on the PowerShell gallery. And I believe it might be just called OMS ingestion, but we'll see the module name later. And also in my GitHub repo for this talk, I've got links to the modules that we use and all of that. But you install the module, you can use get OMS API ingestion file. So give it my workspace ID, then the key, then tell it what log it is. Actually, I guess give it the body first. Tell it the log. Yes. And then the thing is, you need to tell it what field in your data is the timestamp field. So in this case, in fact, I think I pointed out in the video, in this case, I've got my timestamp, and that matches the property name. So there's some verbose output, and it comes up as accepted. So we head back over to the portal, and now down the left-hand side, there's under General, there's Logs, and I remember where it is eventually. There we go. Now what we'll see is there's a Custom Logs category, and if we go into that, we'll see PS Test, which is what we called it in the script, but it's got this suffix on it, which is CL, and that stands for Custom Logs. So you can literally name your log any string, just know that it is going to have _CL at the end of it. Now, you can expand those logs and it'll show you the properties that are under it. But at the moment, those are just the default out of the box ones. Our actual data hasn't showed up in Sentinel. It takes, the first time you send data through, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to get the sort of the table set up. So you'll see I'll go back a little bit because a little bit further than that. So there's that little eye icon, which I'm about to click on next to the name. There it is. That's a quick shortcut for previewing the data. And then there's a C in editor, which shows you the Custo query that it's using to preview the data. And I run it a couple of times and I get nothing because it's still thinking about things. So there's actually a couple of cuts in the video here. Then I run it again and we got some data. So now we can see the entire output of that, I believe it was get service. I probably could have named the log better so I actually remember what it was. No, it must have been get process. But what you'll notice is each column has the same column title that it would have had in PowerShell, but it's got an underscore and then a letter. That letter's telling you what sort of data is in that column. So an S is a string, D is a decimal. I think it might be actually technically a real number. There's also _B for Boolean. Now what I'm going to do here is refresh the page so that that expanded list shows everything as well. So there we go, refresh the page, head back into my custom logs, expand that particular custom log, and now we can see the entire list of properties, including their types, so Boolean, string. Down the bottom, it's hard to see, but there's an _D and it says real. I don't know why they wouldn't just call it integer or something like that, but hey, that's what it is. And you'll also see that there's a history here of previous queries that I've run. That'll disappear the next time you hit run. A cool thing about this editor as well is there's this time range thing, and at the moment you'll see it's set in query. So I've got a where time generated is more than 24 hours ago. Yeah. So basically, if it was today.
Hey, Josh, do you know if it costs anything to run these queries in Log Analytics?
The queries, no, because you've paid to get the data in there. The queries are all free. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Yep. You can take that where line out and set the time range up here yourself. So if you were rapidly going, okay, was it 24 hours ago? Was it a week ago? Blah, blah, blah. You can set your range there and not worry about what the query is. The editor also has some decent IntelliSense as well, which is handy. So that was kind of a rather unstructured, just let's send some random data at Sentinel. Put a bit more formality around it. I created a function. And as you can see up the top, it is the module for sending data to Log Analytics is OMS Ingestion API. And I'm also using the new Microsoft Secrets Management module, which we'll see down below when I get that. So this function is, once I'm finished looking at the modules, the function's called send as AZ Sentinel log. My thinking here is that I would put this in a module, set it in my module path, and then I'd use this for my warning, error, verbose logging in my scripts. And then just whenever my scripts run, the information from those logs end up in Sentinel. Then if I wanted to take action on that, I can set up alerts based on those logs. So the function itself, the only mandatory parameter is the message. Everything else has defaults. So if I just want to quickly send an alert through, I just type out the message. There are levels. Like I said, these match pretty closely to the sort of logging, is logging the right term, the commandlets that you've got available to you in PowerShell. So like write information, write verbose, write warning, write error. And I default to information. And I've taken a relatively generic approach with the log name. It's just PowerShell, because I'm thinking I'll use this across a whole bunch of things. That PowerShell is a pretty decent name for the generic log, but of course we can overwrite that. Then there's this whole section here that uses get PS call stack for the defaults. There's a note down there saying that it was borrowed from the PowerShell Framework Collective's PS Framework blogging stuff. All of this, it helps make the alert richer without having to do much actual work on my end. So if it was in a module, I'd get the module name, I'd find out what file it's running in, what line it ran from, all of that sort of stuff. The problem with how I'm demoing this is I don't get all of that information, so I do overwrite it manually. Initially, I was having some trouble with automatic importing of the modules because I'm actually running this in PowerShell 7, so I've explicitly imported both of those modules I need. And then I get my Workspace ID and my Workspace key using that secrets management module. I've named them appropriately, so OMS Workspace ID and OMS key. The thing that I missed when I did this initially and had to re-record a bit was that as plain text switch. So by default, your secrets are stored as secure strings and they're returned as secure strings, which makes sense. But the OMS module is looking for just a plain text key. So instead of like piping to convert from secure string, I've just gone and done the conversion right off the bat. Then again, we create our timestamp and fill out the message data. So this is just pulling through all of the parameters from above and anything that's been generated within the script, like the timestamp. And also I grab the computer that it's been called from as well with the environment variable, environment computer name. Then I go and put together all the data for OMS itself. So that's the body that we just created before, the log type, the workspace ID, the key, and of course telling it what the timestamp field is. And finally, we go and send off the data. So that's the function. This script is available on my GitHub repo as well. So feel free to go and grab it and take bits from it, use it, do whatever you need to do. How we're going to use it for this demo though is in a scheduled job where I'm specifying the address for my blog and I go off and ping it twice. And if it responds, then my log back to Azure is all okay. I set the log level to information and I'm specifying the log here as blog check, just to separate it from anything else that I might end up doing in the future. Now I'm specifically overwriting the module name because how I'm calling this, the module name would be blank. And I figured I might as well use it for something useful. So I just overwrite that to scheduled job. Now, if my blog doesn't respond, I change the message to panic stations and the level to error, and we go off and send the alert using the function. So how are we doing that? And unfortunately, I had to drop back to Windows PowerShell because the module responsible for doing scheduled jobs, which is what we're about to use, can be imported in PowerShell 7, but I ran into some issues. So rather than fight with those, we're back to Windows. So first, find my trigger. I hope most people have used scheduled jobs because they're awesome. Or going forward, use universal automation because that's even more awesome. But it's a hell of a lot easier to do this demo really quickly with a scheduled job. So getting it to repeat on a time thing is kind of interesting. You have to specify once and then say repeat indefinitely and tell it what the interval is. So in this case, I do a time span saying basically repeat once a minute. And the only reason I'm telling it to repeat once a minute is so that we get lots of logs up in Azure Sentinel really quickly. And I was recording this reasonably late at night. So because we're pinging my blog, I also set a scheduled job option to say that it requires the network, because if the machine's offline, there's no point trying to ping it and there's no point trying to send through logs. Finally, register the scheduled job, give it a name, and so that I know what the hell's running on my machine later, I give it a name relevant to this this user group, pointed at that demo file that we just looked through. So part of the reason why I did that all in one file is just to make this step easier for the demo. Give it the trigger, give it the options. When it gets there, yep. And finally, I'll also tell it to run now just to get the ball rolling. Cool. So that's fired off. I can see that it's completed there when I do get job, which means I'm assuming when I check the output from that job that I should just see the words accepted. And I have, which means the data's been sent to Sentinel, and I know that there wasn't an issue in sending it. So again, we go into the logs. Now this is in Azure Sentinel. There is a shortcut here to logs, so you don't have to go through to the Log Analytics workspace. But from here, you can't get to the settings. So the reason why I had to go through to Log Analytics explicitly earlier was to get the workspace ID and key from the advanced settings. But now I can see my new blog check custom list. And once again, we've got the default list of properties there. So my actual data hasn't made it through to Sentinel yet. So that's the query there. We're getting the latest 10 alerts, and I believe we pause a bit and then run it again, and there's some data. So I can see the alert came through from my desktop. The information level was information, and it is getting a line ID, which is the line in that script file, which is handy. And if we go across, we can see all the information, including the message, all okay, blog is online. And so that's what I would then expect, and that should be the end of the video. Then if this was a generic log for all of my PowerShell logging, I could come in here and see, okay, this computer fired off that script. It had a warning on line whatever while it was running this function, and the message was blah. So then I could filter on computer names, I could filter on log levels, I could filter, if I think I'm having an issue with a specific module, I could filter on module name. Once you've got the data in there, the possibilities for what you can do are, I know it's cliche, but literally endless. Then, are there any questions before I jump into the final video? Nope. Okay.
Oh, good over here.
Cool. So then the final thing is, what can we do on the automation front? So what I wanted to do is, if my blog went down, I wanted to tweet about it. And I think Andrew might have seen the tweet go out when he was checking the user group's Twitter this morning.
Yep.
So there's a few components to this. The first one is a automation account. And I'm using this simply to just run a script. And I find this the easiest way to do it instead of functions, just because of the integration between this and logic apps, which we're going to use in a second. So I create a new automation account. Again, give it a name that makes sense. Hopefully I spelled that right. I didn't actually think to check. Pick my resource group. And the reason why I'm using the same resource group for all of this is it makes it easier to clean up later. I just have to go to that one resource group and delete it all once I know that I don't need to revisit the demos. So we go off and create that. It does, I believe it takes a little bit of time. So I'm pretty sure there's a pause there. But once it's done, you can refresh, click into it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I actually need a module. So in automation accounts, you can pull PowerShell modules from the PowerShell gallery, which is really cool. So if you scroll down to shared resources, there's the modules gallery. And I need a module for tweeting. And my go-to for that is PS Twitter API. So I search for that, I click into it, and then click import. Now, I think I linger on this page a bit because what I'm used to is having to satisfy prerequisites on a module. So if a module has prerequisites, you need to go and import those manually yourself, and you need to wait for the import to finish, and the import isn't quick, unfortunately. So I've had to sit here for coming and going, like do an import, come back 5 minutes later, do the next import, come back 5 minutes later. It gets a bit tedious. I forgot with this one, I don't actually need to satisfy any prereqs, so I can literally just carry on. Luckily, I did remember to pause for a little bit of that. So now, the actual script you're running is in a run book. When you create a new automation account, you get 3 demos out of the box, and I normally go through and delete those so that they're not there and I don't have to see them. In this case, in the interest of time, I just left them there and created a new run book. Give it a name, and then specify the runbook type. Now, what's cool for PowerShell people is PowerShell is a primary option in this environment, as you can tell from having access to the gallery. So we end up there in a editor, and there's actually some cool things on the left-hand side here where you can reference commandlets and assets and all sorts of things, which are really awesome. But all I've done here is dump in a script, which is available on GitHub again. And it has a parameter up the top, and this parameter surfaces in the logic app when you're specifying, hey, I want to go and use that automation account runbook. We import the module, and then these 2 lines here, get automation PS credential. I'm about to go and add those because I honestly had forgotten about them. But those, I believe once you've set them up, you can go into assets here, then credentials, and then click on them, and it will add in the command that you need to pull those credentials. I was using a script I'd already written, so they were there when I pasted it in, which is handy. But it's a really neat feature. Then it's just a matter of using the module. So I've imported it. I specify my OAuth settings, which is literally a API key, API secret, access token secret. And I'm using those as username password pairs, which probably isn't smart, but it gets the job done. Set my OS settings, send my tweet, which is literally just the message. I have made this runbook have a default message, so if I accidentally call it, something shows up on Twitter. So I don't have to specify a message. And now that I've talked through all of that, I think I actually pointed some things for a bit. So let's hope I don't spend too long doing that. Skip forward just a little bit. I think at this point, it's when it dawned on me about the credentials. So I had to think about where I add those. So now the thing is, you can have different versions of a script. So I just saved that, and then I need to publish it in order to use it. You can, if you're making changes and then realize, oh, bugger, I've stuffed it up, you can click revert to published, and it will just undo all the changes that you've made. There is also a test pane here, which just runs through the script. And in this case, if I pressed that, I would end up with a tweet that says, this is a test tweet, blah, blah, blah. But I save, then I publish. It asks if you really want to overwrite the published version, which at the moment was nothing. Then those credentials, when I remember where they're at, yeah, there we go. They're actually back on the runbook themselves. And scroll down under shared resources, there's a credentials option. Now, I do a cut here when I put mine in. The passwords are blank or like have asterisks, but because I'm using both username and password for those various keys and tokens, I didn't actually want everyone to see what the username looked like. So I do a cut here. It's just a case of filling out the name, username, password, blah, 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 and then clicking create. So magic of television, those two credentials are created, and you can see the first two characters of those two strings. Luckily, they won't get you very far. So that automation account runbook is the thing that does the tweet. I can use that in isolation. I could set up a webhook and use that as a way of calling an API to send a tweet if I really wanted to. But I'm going to use logic apps as the glue to connect Azure Sentinel to that script that I'm running whenever I get an alert. So I create a new logic app, of course, put it in the same resource group, give it a name. Once I've remembered what the user group's initials are, there we go. Now, what's interesting here is you can turn on log analytics for your logic apps and your other resources, and then you could point that at Sentinel and be able to alert on your logic apps as well, and your other resources, which is awesome. Now, I did cut here for the deployment, but literally as soon as I pressed pause, it came up as finished anyway, so it was a little bit of a waste of time. But then you end up coming straight into the Logic Apps Designer where there's a bunch of templates and common triggers and that. I click create blank one and then search for Sentinel. So you need the Sentinel trigger in order for Sentinel to see it as a valid playbook. And there's only actually one Sentinel trigger, and that is when an alert is triggered, which makes sense. But I wish they would add other ones in there, like an incident was closed, an incident was assigned, just to make it possible to manage workflows better in the future. Oh well. So the only thing you need to do for Sentinel is log into your tenant. Just basically grant consent. So I'm already signed in. I click my account, it goes through, it does its thing, and I'm in. And that's literally all it needs, so I minimize that so it's out of the way. Then next, I craft the message of, or the body of my tweet. I do that as a variable. And I can literally call it anything. I call it, I believe, tweet message. And it's a string. So the string itself, I pull through the alert display name as the start of the tweet. Then I chuck up a little bit of extra metadata there. So I pull out the severity, when I find that, yep. And when the alert was generated, which I forget's down the bottom. There it is. And just because this is a test, I do put a note there so that people don't actually think something's wrong. Right, so that's now the body of my tweet. I put it there just as a easy way of updating it later without accidentally breaking other things or potential reuse if I wanted to use it somewhere else. So my next action is for Azure Automation, and I need to create a job. Again, need to log into my tenant. I really hate having to do this for each individual item, but it's how it is. And now just fill out the metadata. So subscription, resource group, automation account. Now what I find to be a pain here is it doesn't automatically ask you which playbook you want to run. What you have to do is head down to add new parameter, then choose runbook name. And then that pops up in the list and you get to pick from the list. But what it automatically then does is pull through your parameters from that script. So in this case, it knows my parameter is message, and it also pulls through the default text that I had against it, which I think is a really cool feature. And if I had multiple parameters, it would list them all there so that you could chop and change that however you want within Logic Apps. Now, of course, I don't want the default, so I replace that with the variable that I just created, which is my tweet message. So to be clear, that variable that I created, I could have built that in that text field as well. My personal way of working is I like create the variable, use the variable, then I can reuse it. So if I wanted to create another tweet or an email, I could send the same message in the email without having to think things through too much. There was a question earlier about costs. There are small costs involved with Logic Apps and automation accounts, but I haven't actually. No, I'm not 100% sure. I know at least one of them has a free tier up to X many execution minutes a month, and that might be the case for both of them. I do know that it's not all these demos that I'm doing and forgetting them and leaving them running for a couple of days. They're not having too big of an impact on my credits. It's just definitely something to be aware of. There is a cost involved there. I'm done with the Logic app, click save, and when it's finished, head back to Sentinel. Head into the workspace. So yeah, down the bottom there is playbooks, and that pulls through your Logic apps. What's interesting here is this is showing two Logic apps. That first one, my Tribe Excel formatter, which was a bit of an experiment for chucking company formatting into an Excel spreadsheet, that's listed there as well. But it's not actually a valid Sentinel playbook. So I'm not sure why it shows there, but the good news is it doesn't show when you're creating the alert for your automation options. So I can see it there, it's enabled, it's got no runs against it, which makes sense. So what I need to do is create my own custom alert. So instead of going to the templates, I head up the top to create. Oh, actually, no. Let's have a look at the custom alerts first, now that it's had some time to gestate. So we can see there, we've actually got a ton of alerts now. But what I'm interested in is what the name of my log is, and also I want to test out the query that I'm going to use on my alert. So my computer name, unfortunately it doesn't, or if you were, actually, let's just go back and see it. I might have gone back too far. I won't. So when I get rid of that time generated and I start typing, it gives me IntelliSense for the column names. So I start typing computer and it's giving me IntelliSense for that, and then it gives me IntelliSense for the various operators. Unfortunately, what it doesn't do is pull through the potential values. So I have to type that out by hand by looking down at my computer name column there. And for whatever reason, that must have been hard to read. So if I run that, I confirm that I get stuff back. Then I also care about the log level. So I'll add that. And for testing purposes, because at the moment I don't have any errors, I do information. I get information back, I change it to error, and at the moment I get nothing, and that's expected because my blog was online the whole time. So I grab that query, head over to analytics, and instead of the templates, I click create. And then I create a scheduled rule. There is a second option in there. I haven't ever used it. So unlike templates, obviously I have to fill out my own metadata. The thing here, and I just pick a random thing, call it impact, sure, whatever. The thing is to remember that in my logic app, I specified that my my analytics name is going to be included in the tweet. So I need to keep in mind that this name is going to be tweeted out. And then of course, when my blog's down, that's a high severity event. So I paste in my query, and I can see on the left, on the right in the results pane that I get nothing. If I change that to information, all of a sudden, I've had 26 results. So I'll change that back to error because that's what I actually want to alert on. Now I want to map the host through the computer, and I believe that's the only thing I map. But I click add, and you'll see it added that extend host custom entity equals computer. So if you knew what you were doing, you could put that in your scripts yourself. For the sake of the demo, I want this to run pretty quick. So I put it as run every 5 minutes. And I'm only letting it see the data for the last 1 hour. Then I say, hey, create an alert if you get more than 2 results. So what will happen is that red bar goes in. If you remember when I had that set to information, it had the line going up. Basically, the line going past, the blue line going past the red line means you've had an incident. Or rather, you've generated an alert. Now, because I didn't want to spam Twitter, I click stop running query and say, don't run the query again for 1 hour after you've had an alert generate. Then I do want instance. So my logic app fires when an incident has been raised, not an alert. So I do want my alerts creating instance, so I leave that as enabled. And because I haven't had time to play with it yet, I leave alert grouping off as well. And part of that is I don't know if that has any negative interactions with the logic app. And now on the automated response tab, I can see that I have a playbook available to me. That's the one we set up earlier, and the trigger kind is Azure Sentinel. So I can choose that from the list. And then review and create. So there's all the information about it. Click create. That query is in GitHub as well, so you can go and have a look at that, though It's obviously unique to my computer in that, but it's a good building block. And now we can see it's on the list of alerts. So what we need to do is fudge some details and make it so that we actually start getting some blog down events. So I changed my blog address, saved the file, and now whenever my 1 minute scheduled job runs, it can't ping the blog because the address the address is wrong. So what we should see pretty quickly, the next time that job runs, which I believe is actually fairly quick in this case. Yep, there we go. So there's our first error. Now we're not actually going to get an incident until we get three items returned. But I'll head over to the instance tab and basically wait for it to start to come through. Now remember, there was quite a large gap there. So it took 3 minutes for me to get 3 failures, which then means the next time the analytics rule runs, which happens every 5 minutes, that's when the alert's created, and then that's when the instance created. So if my timing was really bad, that could have meant up to 8 minutes between when I started this part of the demo and when my incident came through, which is a really long time when you're sitting there refreshing it with the recording paused. But so I've got my instance there. I can work on it as an instance, so I can assign it to myself. I can put notes in there. I can tag other people in to have a look at things. It's actually really cool once you start diving into that side of things. But of course, what we're interested in is the tweet going out and the playbook running. So I believe in a moment, we'll head back down to playbooks, and we can see that it's had 1 run and it succeeded. If we scroll down, we can again see it succeeded, and it was 11:30 for me. And of course, there's the tweet. And I pop a reply on there to say, see you guys all tomorrow. Which was technically true. It was still tomorrow because it was before midnight. So I believe that is the end of the demos. Let's head back to PowerPoint. And none of those videos worked. So we'll head to the big scary face. Oh, if I can remember. All right, fine. Apparently this was still running in the background. Demo. Yep, yep. All right. So I do want to call out a module from a company called Wartel. And it's called Azure Sentinel. It's really good for automating Sentinel itself. So what you can do with Azure Sentinel or as Sentinel is create those analytics. So if you've got big deployments or if you're providing security services to clients, you can specify in code how you want Sentinel set up, and then just push it at the tenants and get everything set up without having to click through the things and forget to do this and forget to do that. It is really, really handy if you're going to start doing Sentinel on scale. So that was well, considering the scope of Sentinel, a really quick tour through what Sentinel is. Sorry. Mate, she is hitting the wall. A really quick tour through what Sentinel is and the beginnings of the out-of-the-box stuff you can do with it for security. But then also how we can twist it to be our logging input point for our PowerShell scripts instead of like the event log or a transcript on disk or something. So as a reminder, you can hit me up if you've got any questions at Windows NZ on Twitter. My repo for this content is Windows/talks on GitHub, and that QR code will actually take you directly to the folder for this session. So if you don't want to find your way through the repo, try and scan that with your phone and it'll take you directly there. It's just a bit of an unwieldy link for showing raw on screen. Any questions?
Hey, Josh, I do have a question. So
Sure.
on your sources that you connected to, I noticed that there were a bunch of Microsoft sources. Is there any difference in the costs of importing that data?
Good question. I feel like you've seen this before. So yes, that cost for ingestion is for external things coming into Sentinel. Ingesting Azure data and Office 365 data is free. So like, for example, where I could have pointed now free for ingestion, I believe the retention and all of that's still its own thing. So I believe if I'd clicked the button to do analytics on my Logic app, that would have been free, potentially.
Cool.
And my Azure Active Directory, if I had the licenses for that, ingesting that would be free as well. But it's when you start doing Fortinet and AWS and all of that, that's where you get the costs.
Right, yeah. That's very cool though, especially that AZ Sentinel module. So really, if you find a setup that you really enjoy, you can kind of box it up and just take it to different companies to play.
It makes it relatively easy to productize a security offering.
Yeah.
Or say there's a big vulnerability like the SMB3 thing that's floating around at the moment. If you're managing a bunch of people, you can set up a new alert for that and just fire it off to all of their tenants.
Yeah, save it as a gist, and you can, distribute that quickly throughout the community too, right?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe there are, and I'm pretty sure I've linked to them in my resources on GitHub. There are community repos available with like sample queries for different known vulnerabilities and all sorts. So there are a lot of resources out there if you want to do the security side of things, which, of course, given that's what it's for, it does really well.
Yeah, it's very cool. I kind of like it. It has that all-in-one solution where you can be given a task like, make sure that we have none of this given event ID. And you can, with code, verify that you're triggering on it, that, that your network and your environment is as you think it should be. Even if you don't maybe know all the details. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. One of the cool, so there is an agent you can use, that you can deploy onto endpoints to grab data from the endpoints. One of the ones that was really cool for showing a security event trigger was I had it on my machine and I set up the Windows event log. I believe that's what it was called. No, I don't think I can head in there. There was a Windows event log collector. It would grab event log information from my laptop, and one of the out-of-the-box templates was the security event log's been cleared. So I could go in and clear my security event log, and a couple of minutes later see an alert in Sentinel.
Very nice. Very nice.
It's just one of those ones that's really nice for demos.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can see how that would be useful. You turn on your event log logging, and then anything that's in the event log, you can create alerts for.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you don't have something already in place at your organization. I mean, it seems like if you're already in the 365 Azure world, it's pretty easy to kind of plug this up and get some value out of it at a low cost of entry too.
Yes. One thing, so my example with the automation side of this was a little bit silly, sending a tweet, but think about the things that you could do. Say, for example, someone you're monitoring the firewall on an endpoint, the Windows firewall. You set up an alert to fire when, say, the domain policy's been disabled.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got the legs back into your environment, whether that's a hybrid agent or whatever is happening, you could fire a script which then goes and shuts that machine down, or if you've got legs into the firewall, kick it off the network automatically. So there's a lot of space there for pulling on existing PowerShell skills and applying them in the security realm.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's really cool. The event log stuff, kind of taking over the or using it in place of some of the traditional event log forwarding stuff that's out there, it would be really cool.
Yeah. And all of that stuff, you can look into the logs of all of those out of the box stuff. It's just, it's harder to find your way around when you're not dealing with a list of like 2 or 3 custom logs, because even if you don't have them turned on, the logs are there ready to go.
So does it ingest the logs? Do you have to tell it which logs you want ingested from,
Yes.
from your Windows client?
So I
Okay.
believe when you're setting up the event log, I believe you tell it which event log areas you want to grab, and what event log levels, and possibly even IDs. So you can just go, yeah, get everything, or because there is a cost involved, you can go, no, I only want security and I don't want information, for example.
Yeah.
Sure. If you could get it down to the event ID space, then that would be really slick to be only.
It's been a while since I've looked at that, so I
Yeah.
can't guarantee that's a thing, but
Yeah.
I didn't see it. That was one thing I saw, was like, if I grab all security, it can kind of jump up pretty quick. But if maybe if you do it for just your servers or something, play with the numbers and test it out.
Yeah, you're right. ISO 8601. Sorry, I'm catching up on chat now.
I remember you blogging about it.
The other thought about it in terms of just for trying to just filter some logs, I wonder if you could basically forward those logs to another server and then ingest from that server, so you're only forwarding.
So that's sort of the framework that they have when you go into this CEF or syslog connectors. It'll take you through setting up a syslog server. So I had
in Azure,
bunch
right?
of VM in Azure or on-prem. And then you install the agent on that syslog server. And then you can choose so how I would do it in order to rein in costs a little bit is get everything on-prem to send it to my on-prem syslog server, and then choose what I forward to Sentinel from that central point. And then I've sort of got the best of both worlds. I've got the stuff I care about in Sentinel, but I still have the option of logging everything on-prem if I need to go back and manually trawl through stuff. Which I don't, but it's the option's there.
That makes a lot of sense. That sounds really cool.
And yeah, it's all documented. They have both scenarios there. It's really cool.
Well, awesome. I'm going to end the recording here.
Awesome.